The Christmas card arrived in a crisp crimson envelope. It felt heavier than it should, like it was carrying more than just a glossy photo and a printed signature. I slid it open with my thumb, a small familiar dread coiling in my stomach. It was an annual ritual, this feeling. The forced smiles, the coordinated outfits, the carefully curated image of a family that only existed for the 60 minutes a photographer was present. My daughter, Lily, bounced on her toes beside me. At 6, Christmas was pure, uncut magic. "Is it from Grandma? Did we make the front?" she asked, her voice a melody of innocent excitement. She had been so proud during the photo shoot, sitting in the front row in the little velvet dress Nona had bought her, a special exception to my mother's rigid denim and white shirts theme. My mother had sniffed at the dress, but allowed it, a rare concession I'd foolishly mistaken for warmth. I pulled out the card. There we were, the whole clan, arranged on my parents' sprawling lawn. My father, looking vaguely uncomfortable as always. My mother, her smile as sharp and brittle as a shard of glass. My sister Claire, the golden child, nestled into the arm of her equally smug husband, Mark. Their two perfect blonde children, Liam and Ava, were positioned like cherubs at their feet, and me, standing slightly off to the side, my hand resting on an empty patch of grass where my daughter should have been. I stared at it. My mind refused to process what my eyes were seeing. I flipped the card over, as if the back might hold an explanation. "Wishing you a picture-perfect holiday. Love, the Harrisons." Picture perfect. My blood ran cold. I looked back at the photo, tracing the spot beside me. The grass was too smooth, the lighting was subtly wrong. A faint pixelated ghosting lingered where her dark curls should have been. "Mommy, let me see," Lily chirped, reaching for it. My hand tightened on the card, creasing the corner. How do you explain this? How do you tell a 6-year-old that her own grandmother, her own family, had erased her? Her little face fell as she saw my expression. She peered at the photo in my hand. Her eyes, big and brown, and so much like her father's, scanned the smiling faces. She pointed a tiny finger. "Where am I? I was sitting right there. I remember." My throat closed up. The air in my kitchen turned thick and hard to breathe. I had no words. What could I possibly say? "They deleted you, honey. You weren't the right color scheme. I didn't have to." The phone rang, its cheerful chime sounding like a scream. My mother's name flashed on the screen. Of course, she always called to make sure the card had landed, to gauge the impact. Family politics are its own kind of warfare, and my mother was a 4-star general. I answered, my voice a strained whisper. "Hello? Did you get it?" she asked, her tone breezy and bright. It was the voice she used when she knew she'd done something cruel and was waiting for the applause. "I got it," I said. My gaze was fixed on Lily, who was now looking at the card with a furrowed brow, a miniature storm of confusion gathering in her eyes. The hurt hadn't landed yet. It was still circling, looking for a place to roost. "Well, it turned out beautifully, didn't it? The photographer did a wonderful job, so crisp." I took a breath. "Mom, where is Lily?" A beat of silence. It wasn't surprise, it was the quiet hum of a predator, enjoying the stillness before the strike. "Oh, that! Well, we had to make a decision. The composition was just off." "The composition," I repeated. The words tasted like ash. "She's your granddaughter. She was sitting in the front row." "Don't be dramatic, Sarah," she sighed, the manufactured patience in her voice like nails on a chalkboard. "It was a simple edit. The photographer agreed. Her dress, her dark hair, she just didn't blend. She doesn't look like us. She doesn't look like us." The phrase hung in the air between us, heavy and toxic. My daughter's father was Colombian. Lily had his beautiful olive skin and a cascade of dark curly hair that was the envy of her friends. In a sea of my family's pale skin and mousy brown hair, she was a vibrant splash of life, and they had just wiped her away. Lily, who had been listening with the unnerving focus of a child who knows something is wrong, looked up at me. Her lower lip began to tremble. "Mommy," she whispered, her voice cracking. "Why am I not there?" That was it. That was the sound of the world tilting on its axis. The sight of my daughter's heart breaking in real time at the hands of her own grandmother was a visceral, physical blow. I felt something inside me snap, not loudly. It was a quiet, clean break. The part of me that had spent 34 years trying to please them, to earn their love, to keep the peace, it just severed. I looked at the phone in my hand, at my mother's name glowing on the screen. I could scream, I could cry, I could beg her to explain how she could be so monstrous. It's what she expected, it's what I had always done, but I didn't. I hung up, I just pressed the red button and ended the call. The silence that followed was profound. It wasn't an absence of sound, it was a presence. It was the sound of a war I had just decided to finish. I knelt and pulled Lily into my arms. She buried her face in my shoulder and finally let out the sob she'd been holding back. I held her tight, rocking her gently, my mind whirring. The tears she was crying weren't just for a photoshopped picture. They were for a lifetime of slights she was too young to understand, but could feel in her bones. The same slights I had been absorbing my entire life. My sister Claire was born with a crown on her head. I was born with a mop in my hand. That was the dynamic established before I could even walk. I was the older one, the responsible one, which, in my family's language, meant I was the one to blame. I remembered being 8. My mother had a collection of glass figurines, delicate little birds she kept on the mantelpiece. Claire, who was 5, wanted to play with the blue one. I told her no, that Mom would be mad. She threw a tantrum, and in her flailing, she knocked the whole shelf. Glass birds shattered on the hearth. When my mother came in, her eyes scanned the scene, me, frozen in horror, Claire, already crying fat, theatrical tears, and the glittering remains of her collection. Before I could speak, Claire pointed a trembling finger at me. "Sarah did it! She pushed me!" I was sent to my room for the rest of the day. No dinner. I sat on my bed, my stomach aching with hunger and injustice, and listened to my father cooing to Claire downstairs, telling her it was okay, that it was just an accident. My version of events was never requested. The verdict had been delivered. I was guilty. That was my role. It was a pattern that repeated itself endlessly. When Claire failed a math test, it was because I hadn't helped her enough with her homework. When she got caught smoking behind the gym, it was because I was a bad influence. When her first boyfriend broke up with her, I was the one who had to listen to my mother rage for an hour about how I wasn't supportive enough of my devastated sister. I learned to make myself small. I learned that my achievements were inconvenient. I got a full scholarship to a state university. My parents' reaction was a tight, thin smile from my mother and a, well, that's practical, I suppose. 6 months later, when Claire got accepted to an expensive private art school 2 states away, they threw a party. They took out a second mortgage to pay for her tuition and her charming little off-campus apartment. It was never a question. Claire's desires were necessities, mine were afterthoughts. When I got pregnant with Lily, the reaction was predictably cold. Her father and I had separated before I even knew. A painful, complicated ending to a relationship that had been my first real escape. I was alone, and in my family's eyes, I was a failure, a cautionary tale. "Well, you've made your bed," my mother had said, her voice devoid of any sympathy. "I just hope you know what you're getting yourself into. This will be very hard on Claire." Everything was always about how it affected Claire. My pregnancy was an inconvenience to her social standing. My single motherhood was an embarrassment. And Lily was a beautiful, breathing symbol of my failure to be as perfect as my sister. And she didn't look like them. That was the real sin. Lily was a disruption to the pale, bland tapestry of Harrison genetics. She was a question mark in their perfect family photo, an aberration. So they erased her. Holding my weeping daughter in my kitchen, the smell of gingerbread from a neighbor's house wafting through the window, I felt the weight of all those years settle on me. Not as a burden, but as fuel. The quiet snap I'd felt earlier was hardening into something cold and solid. It was resolve. I had spent my life absorbing the blows meant for others, shrinking myself to make them comfortable, accepting blame to keep a peace that was never really peaceful. It was just a prolonged, silent surrender, and I had allowed them, through my silence, to start doing the same thing to my daughter. No more. This ends now. I bundled Lily up, wiped her tears, and whispered, "Let's go for a ride, sweetie. We're going to go see Nona." Her face brightened. Nona's house was a sanctuary. It smelled of garlic and old books, and it was the one place in the world where Lily was treated not just as an equal, but as a queen. Nona was my father's mother. She was a formidable woman, widowed for 20 years, who had seen her son get slowly absorbed into his wife's toxic ecosystem. She saw everything. She rarely interfered, believing people had to fight their own battles, but her disapproval of my mother was a palpable thing, a low-grade hum of judgment in any room they shared. She adored Lily with a fierce, unconditional love that was a balm to my soul. When we arrived, Nona took one look at my face and Lily's tear-streaked cheeks and herded us inside without a word. She sat Lily at the kitchen table with a mug of hot cocoa and a plate of pizza cookies, then led me into her study. What did she do now? Nona asked, her voice low and steady. She didn't need to specify who she was. I handed her the Christmas card. I watched her put on her reading glasses, her sharp eyes taking in the photo. I saw her jaw tighten. She looked at the empty space beside me, then back at the glossy, smiling faces of my mother and sister. She let out a soft, sharp breath, like a curse. That witch, she said, her voice flat. She finally did it. She finally found a way to be cruel that even I didn't think she was capable of. She placed the card on her heavy oak desk and looked at me. What are you going to do, Sarah? And for the first time, I had an answer that wasn't nothing. I'm going to end it, Nonna, I said. The words felt solid, real, all of it, but I don't know how. She nodded slowly, a dark fire in her eyes. Good, she said. That's my girl. Waiting stopped being a choice the moment they hurt that child. She stood up and walked over to a heavy filing cabinet in the corner of the room. I think I might know how. For years, I had heard whispers about a family trust. It was something my great-grandfather, a stern and shrewd man, had set up decades ago. It was tied to the family home, the sprawling property my parents lived on, the one they lorded over everyone as their house. My mother often used it as a weapon. If you want to be welcome in this house, or as long as you're under the roof my family paid for. Nona pulled out a thick, dusty accordion file labeled Harrison Trust. Your great-grandfather didn't trust anyone, least of all his own children, she said, blowing a film of dust off the top. He put the house and a significant portfolio of stocks into a trust. The terms were very, very specific. She spread the documents on her desk. They were old, the paper brittle and yellowed, but the typewritten ink was clear. My father and my mother were the current trustees. Their duty was to manage the assets for the benefit of all of his direct descendants. Upon my father's death, the trust was to be dissolved, and the assets divided equally among his living children. If a child had predeceased him, their share would go to their children. But there was a clause, a very interesting clause my great-grandfather, the cynic, had included. It stipulated that the trustees could not use the principal of the trust for their own personal benefit beyond basic upkeep of the property. They couldn't sell assets, they couldn't borrow against the house, and they certainly couldn't use the funds to, say, finance a certain golden child's art degree, her lavish wedding, her failed gallery business, or the down payment on her sprawling suburban home. I've suspected for years, Nona said, her finger tracing the damning paragraph. Your father is weak, and your mother is a thief, and Claire has been bleeding them dry since the day she was born. I would bet my life they've been dipping into this trust for her, treating it like their personal bank account. My mind flashed with images. Claire's brand new SUV last year, the surprise trip to Paris for her and Mark's anniversary, the constant, expensive renovations on my parents' house, a new kitchen, a new deck, a state-of-the-art home theater in the basement. My father's pension was modest. It never added up. How do we prove it? I asked, my heart starting to hammer in my chest. This was it. This was the weapon. We don't have to, Nona said, a grim smile touching her lips. We just have to demand an accounting. As a beneficiary, you have the right. We hire a forensic accountant, and we let the numbers tell the story. She then pulled out another document. It was a copy of the deed to the house. The owner wasn't John and Carol Harrison. The owner was the Harrison Family Trust. They didn't own the house they had built their kingdom upon. They were tenants, squatters with a fancy title. The trust owns the house, I whispered, the enormity of it sinking in. The trust owns the house, Nona confirmed. And if the trustees are found to be in breach of their fiduciary duty, they can be removed, and a new trustee can be appointed by the court. A trustee who might decide that the most prudent course of action is to sell the primary asset and distribute the proceeds according to the founder's wishes. My mother would lose her house, her throne, the source of all her power. My sister would lose her private bank. The consequences would be catastrophic for them. And for the first time in my life, the thought of my family's pain didn't fill me with anxiety or guilt. It filled me with a cold, clear sense of justice. They had erased my daughter. I was about to erase their entire world. Nona, I said, my voice steady, call your lawyer. The next 2 weeks were a blur of quiet, methodical preparation. Nona's lawyer, Mr. Abram, was a sharp, no nonsense man with eyes that seemed to see right through you. He confirmed everything Nona had suspected. We had them! Cold! We filed a petition with the court to freeze the trust's assets and compel a full accounting. It was a preliminary step, a warning shot. The real battle would be fought on Christmas Day. I knew I had to. It couldn't be a letter from a lawyer, it had to be me. They had to see my face when their world came crashing down. It was the only way to make them understand that this wasn't about money, it was about Lily. My mother called repeatedly after I hung up on her. I let every call go to voicemail. The messages started as annoyed, "Sarah, call me back. This is ridiculous." Then moved to angry, "You are being incredibly childish." And finally landed on manipulative, "You're going to ruin Christmas. Is that what you want? To ruin Christmas for everyone over a silly picture?" Claire sent a series of texts. The first was a faux concerned, "Hey, Mom's worried about you. Everything okay?" When I didn't reply, her tone shifted. "Look, if you're mad about the card, you need to get over it. It wasn't personal." And finally, the classic Claire guilt trip. "You're making this so much harder than it needs to be. Liam and Ava are asking why Aunt Sarah is mad. You're upsetting the kids." I screenshotted every message. I saved every voicemail. It was evidence, not for the court, but for me. A reminder of why I was doing this. Every passive-aggressive word, every dismissive phrase was another brick in the wall I was building between my daughter and their poison. The hardest part was Lily. She was quiet and withdrawn for days. She stopped drawing, which was her favorite thing in the world. I found her one afternoon just staring at her reflection in the hall mirror, touching her dark, curly hair with a sad, puzzled look on her face. My heart broke all over again. I sat down with her. I told her, "Lilybug, some people have very small hearts, and they can only see a very small world in very dull colors. But you, my love, you are a whole rainbow, and their small hearts just can't handle how bright you are. That is their problem, not yours. You are perfect." She looked at me, her big brown eyes searching my face. "Am I still in the family, Mommy?" "You and me," I said, pulling her into a hug. "We are our own family, the best family, and we are going to be just fine." The day before Christmas Eve, I finally answered a call. It was my father. His voice was weary. "Sarah, your mother is a wreck. Just come for Christmas dinner. Let's not fight. Let's just be a family." "Is that what we are?" I asked, my voice calm. He sighed. It was the sound of a man who had been surrendering for 40 years. "Please, Sarah, for me." "We'll be there," I said. "Nona is giving us a ride." And I hung up. The stage was set. Christmas Day dawned cold and gray. Nona arrived at my apartment at precisely 4 p.m. She was dressed in a sharp, tailored black suit, looking more like a CEO attending a hostile takeover than a grandmother going to a holiday dinner. I was in a simple dark dress. Lily, at her own insistence, wore her brightest, most colorful rainbow sweater, a small defiant banner of her own existence. The drive to my parents' house was silent. My stomach was a knot of nerves, but it was a different kind of anxiety than I was used to. It wasn't the fear of their disapproval. It was the electric hum of a decision made, a course of action set. It was the feeling a soldier must have before a battle they know they will win. We pulled into the long driveway. The house was blazing with lights. Through the big picture window, I could see them all milling about in the living room. My aunts, my uncles, my cousins. The flying monkeys, assembled and ready. They had all been briefed, I was sure. They would be ready with their placating words and their gentle pressure for me to apologize and make things right. Funny how making things right always meant me rolling over. Nona parked the car and turned to me. "Remember," she said, her voice firm, "you are not the one on trial here. You are the executioner. Let them talk. Let them dig their own graves. Then you calmly and quietly hand them the shovel." I nodded, took a deep breath, and we walked to the front door. The moment we stepped inside, the cheerful holiday music seemed to falter. The conversation lulled, all eyes turned to us. My mother swept forward, her face a mask of strained hospitality. "Sarah, you made it! And Mother Harrison, what a surprise," she said, her eyes flicking to Nonna's severe suit. "We were so worried." "Were you?" I asked, my voice even. My sister Claire appeared at my mother's side, a glass of wine in her hand. "Sarah, thank God!" she gushed, all fake relief. We were afraid you were going to be stubborn about this. I just looked at her. I didn't say a word. The silence stretched, becoming uncomfortable. This was new for them. I wasn't filling the awkward pauses. I wasn't rushing to reassure them. I was just standing there, a calm, immovable object. My father hurried over, wringing his hands. Come in, come in, get out of the cold. Let me take your coats. We allowed him to take our coats and followed them into the living room. It was exactly as I'd pictured. The fire was roaring, the tree was grotesquely large, and the air was thick with unspoken accusations. My Aunt Carol was the first to approach. Sarah, dear, she said, patting my arm. We were all so sad to hear there was some misunderstanding about the Christmas card. Your mother feels just terrible. Does she? I looked over at my mother, who was pointedly fluffing a pillow on the sofa, refusing to meet my eyes. Dinner was a masterclass in passive aggression. My mother seated me at the far end of the table, next to my perpetually frowning Uncle Bob. Claire spent the entire meal telling a long, loud story about her son Liam's lead role in the school nativity play. Every few minutes, my mother would interject with, "Oh, he's just a natural performer. He gets it from the Harrison side, of course." They ignored Lily completely, not with overt cruelty, but with the far more insidious method of acting as if she wasn't there. They passed dishes around her. They directed questions over her head. Lily, to her credit, sat quietly, eating her mashed potatoes, her small face a study in stoicism. She was watching me, waiting. Finally, as dessert was being served, my mother cleared her throat. The performance was about to begin. Well, she said, beaming at the assembled family, now that we're all here, together, as a family should be, I think there's something we need to address. She looked at me, her expression one of magnanimous forgiveness. It was my cue to apologize for being difficult, for making a scene, for misunderstanding their intentions. I placed my fork down. The sharp, ugly clink echoed in the sudden silence. You're right, Mom, I said, my voice carrying easily across the table. There is something we need to address. I looked at my father. Dad, do you remember great-grandfather Harrison? He blinked, confused by the change of subject. Of course, I was a boy, but I remember him. Stern man. He was a smart man, Nona interjected from her seat beside me. A careful man. He didn't trust easily. My mother shot Nona a venomous look. What is the meaning of this? If this is about the card, Sarah, This is about the Harrison family trust, I said, cutting her off. The color drained from my father's face. My mother's mouth snapped shut. Claire, who had been scrolling on her phone, looked up, a flicker of alarm in her eyes. I don't know what you're talking about, my mother said, her voice a little too high. I think you do, I said calmly. I reached into my purse and pulled out a simple manila envelope. I slid it down the long mahogany table. It stopped right in front of my father's plate. What is this? He asked, his hand trembling slightly as he reached for it. That, I said, is a copy of a petition filed in probate court 2 days ago. It's a petition to compel a full forensic accounting of the trust you and Mom have been managing for the last 30 years. A collective gasp went around the table. My aunts and uncles were staring, mouths agape. You what? My mother shrieked, her mask of civility shattering. How dare you? That is private family business. It stopped being private when you used it as your personal slush fund to finance Claire's entire adult life, I said. My voice was ice. The trips, the cars, the down payment on her house, the thousands, hundreds of thousands you funneled to her over the years, all in direct violation of the terms of the trust. Claire shot to her feet. That's a lie. My parents helped me out. There's no law against that. There is when it's not your money, Nona said, her voice cutting through the noise. It's the trust's money. Money that belongs to all the beneficiaries, including Sarah, including my great-granddaughter, Lily. At the mention of her name, Lily looked up, her eyes wide. My father was staring at the documents, his face pale and slack. He knew, of course he knew. He had just gone along with it, as he always did. We were going to pay it back, he stammered. It was just a loan. A 30-year loan with no documentation and no repayment schedule? I asked. I don't think the court will see it that way. And I don't think they'll look kindly on the fact that the house you're all sitting in is the primary asset of that trust. A house you've been borrowing against illegally for years. This was the kill shot. My mother's face, which had been red with rage, went completely white. She looked like she had seen a ghost, the house, her kingdom, the foundation of her identity. You wouldn't, she whispered, her voice shaking. You photoshopped my 6-year-old daughter out of a family photo because you didn't like her hair color, I said, my voice dangerously quiet. You erased her, believe me, I would. I stood up, pushing my chair back. I walked around the table to where Lily was sitting and gently took her hand. We're leaving now. The room was in chaos. Claire was sobbing. Her husband Mark was trying to comfort her, his face a mask of disbelief. My mother was just staring at me, her mouth opening and closing like a fish. My father had his head in his hands. My Aunt Carol grabbed my arm as I passed. Sarah, you can't do this. You're destroying the family. I looked down at her hand on my arm, then back up at her face. What family? I asked. The one that erases children? That family deserves to be destroyed. I pulled my arm free. Nona stood and joined us at the door. As we were putting on our coats, a final desperate plea came from the dining room. It was my mother. Wait, she cried, her voice cracking. We can fix this. We'll redo the photo. We'll put her back in. I stopped, my hand on the doorknob. I turned to look at her. This woman, who had caused me a lifetime of pain, now reduced to a desperate, pathetic bargainer. No, I said. And the word was so full, so complete, it felt like the only thing I'd ever said that was completely true. You will do nothing, except talk to my lawyer. And with that, Nona, Lily, and I walked out the door, leaving the ruins of the House of Harrison behind us. The aftermath was swift and brutal. The court-ordered accounting revealed a level of financial mismanagement that was staggering. My parents had effectively embezzled over $500,000 from the trust over 3 decades, almost all of it funneled directly or indirectly to Claire. They were removed as trustees, of course. The court appointed a neutral third party who immediately moved to liquidate the trust's primary asset to repay its debts, the house. My parents were given 90 days to vacate the property they had lived in for 40 years. The house that had been the center of their universe, the symbol of their status, was sold to a developer who planned to tear it down and build luxury condos, a fitting end. The proceeds from the sale, along with what was left of the stock portfolio, were divided strictly according to my great-grandfather's will. My share was substantial. It was enough to secure my future, and more importantly, Lily's. It was enough to buy a small sunny house of our own, hundreds of miles away, in a town where no one knew our name. My parents had to move into a small rental apartment. My father's pension was garnished to begin repaying the trust. Claire and Mark were forced to sell their oversized house to pay back the portion of the money that could be directly traced to them as improper gifts. They downsized significantly. The social fallout was just as devastating for them. Once the legal facts came out, the flying monkeys scattered. My aunts and uncles, who had been so quick to defend my mother, wanted nothing to do with the scandal. My parents and my sister were left isolated, a tiny bitter island of their own making. They never apologized, not once. I received a single rambling letter from my mother, filled with accusations and self-pity. She blamed me for her ruin, for airing dirty laundry, for being ungrateful and vindictive. She never once mentioned Lily's name. I threw it in the fire without a second thought. Our new life is quiet. It's gloriously, wonderfully boring. Our house smells like paint and possibility. Lily has her own room, painted a bright, cheerful yellow, her drawings taped to every wall. She's thriving in her new school. She has friends. She laughs all the time. The sad, puzzled look I saw in the mirror that day is gone, replaced by the easy confidence of a child who knows she is loved and, above all, seen. Sometimes, when the house is quiet at night, I think about that Christmas card. That single, cruel act of erasure. They thought it was a show of power. They thought they could delete my daughter, treat her as a mistake to be corrected. But they miscalculated. They didn't realize that, by trying to erase her, they were handing me the one thing I'd never had before. A reason to fight back that was bigger than my own pain. You can hurt me. I had proven that for 34 years. But you don't get to hurt my child. The peace we have now isn't something that was given to us. It was earned. It was fought for. We built it ourselves out of the ashes of a family that never really was. And every morning, when I see Lily's bright, smiling face, a face so full of life it could never be contained in a picture-perfect photo, I know I did the right thing. I didn't just get justice. I got my daughter back. I got myself back.